Welcome back to the bottom line. I am joined by Justin LoFranco and Tommy Marquez. How's it going, guys?
Thanks for
Good.
having me. Yeah, it's a beautiful Saturday here in Southern California.
I know I woke you guys up early to talk about this, but I couldn't wait because we got some really big new details from CrossFit HQ about what the games is going to look like this year. Justin, let me just ask, what are some of the first details that we've learned and how has this changed what the rest of the summer is going to look like for us?
Yeah, big news coming out of CrossFit HQ yesterday afternoon. Basically, the CrossFit's switching gears a little bit, and they're going to a two-part series, which has never happened before. The first part's going to be online. The second part's going to be on person. All 30 athletes, all 60 athletes, 30 men and women, are going to be competing in an online competition, and the top 5 athletes are going to be going on to Northern California several weeks later. Now, we don't have the exact dates of when both competitions are going to happen yet, but they said more details are going to be released mid-August. But here's a couple of things that we do know so far. I'll run through it. So prize money right now is going to be selected based on your placement from 6th to 30th, and they'll pay out through 20th place. And then obviously the top 5 will go on to compete for the big pool in Northern California. CrossFit is going to be sending out a seminar staff judge specifically to be judging these athletes in person and live. They have said that all events will be filmed and streamed, but we're not exactly sure if it's going to include the first stage and the second stage or just the second stage yet. So we'll have to wait for more details on that. And this is a really important one that didn't actually come in the release, but was based off of a number of conversations that I had with athletes who were on this kickoff call when they were briefed on this, based on a question that came up, which is athletes will not have to compete at the exact same time like Rogue did, which means athletes like Roman Krenikov who are in Russia and Harriet Roberts and Con Porter and Cara Saunders in Australia won't be doing this at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night.
Right.
And so they're going to have something like a window, but we're still waiting on more details.
We've seen now change after change after change. The games was going to be in August, and it was going to be in September, and now it's partially online. Tommy, what does this mean now for the athletes that are gearing up to compete?
Honestly, it just means more of the same, and that's they're just kind of, in my opinion, they're being strung along a little bit with very little information, and they're just kind of being forced to just kind of float along in the wind with the same direction that the game staff has been going. Now, granted, some of this is justified. Obviously, we're in the midst of a global pandemic that has really kind of thrown a wrench into the spokes of everything, unlike we've seen before. But this is just the latest in a turn of like a series of events where dates are getting pushed back. There's uncertainty. There's confusion about timelines and dates and specifics. And although I do think that this change is ultimately probably something that's going to increase the likelihood that we actually have a finals, and we actually get to quote unquote crown the fittest, and I use those quotes loosely, it leaves a lot of people kind of scratching their heads about, like, really at what point are we starting to just kind of dilute this process so much where it becomes this kind of like Frankenstein CrossFit Games, and it doesn't resemble anything like what we're used to seeing. And big picture, it's probably not as bad as some people might react to it. But when you take a 20,000 foot view at the last 2 years of the CrossFit Games, it's really hard to kind of look at that and compare it to the 10 years that preceded it, and not kind of be like, what's the direction of all this? And
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that could be alleviated by some better communication across the board, and hopefully that's something that we're going to get starting with this new regime is in the next week or two, just because talking to athletes, they feel kind of in the dark as well, even despite being on that call. I've talked to a handful of different athletes that are like, yeah, they couldn't really answer any of our questions, and we're just kind of left here, just kind of strung along as well.
Yeah, one question that came up and was reiterated to me based on multiple conversations last night with athletes across the globe was, are athletes going to be allowed to repeat the workout? And I think that's really kind of an important thing because, yeah, they get the sense that this is going to be an open-esque type competition in the sense that they're using their own equipment because CrossFit is not sending out equipment like Rogue did in their competition. So they're thinking, okay, are we going to get a chance to repeat these? If there's a window, is this a one and done kind of scenario? This is a very important question. Athletes have definitely been, I think, strung along a little bit. And I talked to several who are like, I've canceled this, I've done this, I'm trying to peak here, I'm trying to compete, I'm trying to get prepared, kind of preparing for the unknown. This is definitely the ultimate unknown environment here. But one thing that speaks to the challenges here is that I had multiple conversations with the European athletes literally 48 hours ago, Thursday afternoon, and was like, yeah, we basically have a green light that we're going to get an exemption on their visas, and we're making those plans, and it already had been putting forth those travel plans to come to Northern California to compete in Rome September 15th. And then all of a sudden that switches on this phone call and they're like, okay, so which is it? And, the idea that could also change again. Now, I don't really see it changing, but it's been kind of that scenario for athletes. And I know that's kind of taking a toll. It's wearing on them a little bit because our conversations have edged from, can we just get this over with at this point to, yes, I'm still excited to compete, but gosh, this is dragging on.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just to jump in, because now you have to look at the games originally scheduled for last weekend. Now, at the earliest, they're going to be in early to mid-October, depending on when the actual first qualifier is. Now you've pushed back, effectively 2 months, and officially the 2020 season will last over a full calendar year from the time the Open started to the time that the CrossFit Games actually conclude. Now, to CrossFit LLC's case, they're kind of at the mercy of local governments, which is understandable. And the processes with which they have to make each one of these steps and calculations is a little bit hamstrung by, some rapidly changing regulations across the state of California. But what I do think that can alleviate some of that, like I mentioned, is being communicative towards these athletes. Because if they're going through all these hoops to get greenlit special visas and things like that, that is still on the table potentially for October if they do qualify, but just being a little bit more above board and will at least give the sense that they're not flying by the seat of their pants a little bit, and, provide a little bit of comfort to these athletes that have really just been kind of, pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing everything down, pushing the ball down the road just to kind of make sure that this happens. So it really puts them in a tough spot, and it calls into question the programming too now, because we're going online, which is going to limit. I don't know if this is what we were going to talk about later, but this narrows the scope of what's available for the programming to qualify people to in person to the CrossFit Games, right? This you heard straight from Dave Castro's mouth in multiple interviews talking about how one of the things he didn't like about the new system was the direct qualification from the Open, because you're effectively forcing the Open in an online system to do something it was never designed to do, and that's qualify people directly to the CrossFit Games. Now, granted, with a smaller condensed field, the programming book opens up in terms of load and length a little bit inside the home gym, but you're still limiting a significant portion of CrossFit programming in terms of what you can do to get people to the games in Aromas. Not everyone's going to have running. I don't know how you may be able to mark it out somehow and get it pre-approved, but you're going to miss out on some things that, typically we would assume would be the qualifier to not just narrow down to like a games field, but to narrow down to 5. You're telling me you're going to pick the 10th through 6th fittest people on earth and have a legitimate claim from an online qualifier? I will reserve final judgment until I see what those workouts are, because I do think that they can pull a rabbit out of the hat a little bit here. But that's certainly, and I'm speaking for the community here a little bit, that's certainly going to raise some eyebrows.
It absolutely limits the amount of things that you can do. Even if you have access to a tracker and outdoors, but man, I'd be pretty upset if I missed it by 10 seconds because I was running on a gravel pavement road versus somebody who had access to a track because it's across the street. And that just kind of speaks to the availability of that. That's a little outside of the athlete's control, and it's a little outside of CrossFit's control. But man, the difference between 6th and 5th over something like that would be really tough to swallow if I was a 6th-place athlete.
That's a lot of prize money,
Right, totally. Well, just given in the past the way that we've seen the Open programmed, it's always been smart. It's always been, ensuring that people
it's for the masses, right?
It's for the
Everybody
masses.
can compete.
Right. Right. So I wouldn't put it past Dave Castro and the crew to figure out what the test needs to be within reason, not leaving things to chance, not leaving your environment, or, maybe even sending that judge to come to also pre-approve. And we don't really know what that process is going to look like yet. But you're right in that it limits what we can test, and therefore we will kind of always be left questioning, like, is this the best test? Are these the fittest 5 that get to go to the final?
Yeah, and the last thing you want to do is to have the possibility of placing asterisks on the claim that the CrossFit Games has, that they've unequivocally had for,
I think there's an asterisk here no matter what you do.
This year will always be an asterisk. I mean, for everything that everyone has done, always. 2020 will be the year where we were like, what have we been doing?
Yeah, you could have said that last year too. I mean, with the format change and a bunch of the stuff that kind of flies in the face of what CrossFit's very own definition of the fittest was. So it's just unfortunate. Like, to some extent, yeah, you have to give them some leniency because they're just playing with what they can right now. But there's a few other things that I think they could do to go above and beyond to at least like keep people a little bit more in the know, to be a little bit more above board. Now, granted, that's not in the games. That's not in the nature of the games team, especially without a legitimate media arm to kind of communicate those things. But it feels weird when you can say, like, yeah, this online qualifier is, we think it's legit enough to dictate the 10th through 6th fittest people in the world, but it's not legit enough to dictate the top 5. It's like, okay, well then what is it? You're kind of like, and that's not to say
having your cake and eating it too, though. You still get your in-person competition. You still get your big, grand finale there. But, you just recognize it's probably easier to orchestrate logistics for getting 10 people there versus any other number, whichever it is that you want to choose between 1 and 30. But I want to put one thing. I think this is, we focus a lot on here on the negative, but the truth is, CrossFit was always going to put on the competition unless it was absolutely, completely 125% impossible. In fact, it is, if a government entity, a government body didn't tell them no, they were going to try and do this.
Mm-hmm.
And kudos to them for still continuing to try to make it happen in a way that's possible. A lot of athletes in residing outside of, in fact, half of the field lives overseas. 29 of 60 athletes, in fact, live in different countries, in 16 different countries. So, when speaking to a number of them, they were like, at least this is if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna force us to do it, this is probably the most equitable way of doing it.
Yeah.
Is doing this, because otherwise, you're going to go down the roster and then go down the roster again and then go down the roster again to find athletes that can actually make it. And it's just a logistical nightmare. So, they were kind of like, you know what? Okay, if this is what we're going to do, then fine. At least we get to compete and at least we get to participate. And I think that's kind of, I think that's about as good as we were going to get.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I know that a lot of the big sort of like elephant in the room question is, should we even be doing this? Because are we able to, quote, call the fittest on earth after all of the things have gone down in 2020? And to me, as a fan, my answer is still kind of like selfishly like, yeah, I want to watch my favorite people.
It's still going to be entertaining.
It's still going to be great. Like, they went through the beginning of the sanctional season. Like, people have been putting in work. I'm still following them on Instagram. I'm still watching them train. Like, to me as a fan, selfishly, I'm like, yeah, cool. The world still sucks. Okay, move it online. Okay, just bring the top 5 people. Okay, just give me something to watch because I love the sport and I'm into it. And I know that there might be an asterisk, and we're asking questions about whether or not the system and the test is really what it needs to be in order to determine that. But as a fan, I'm kind of just like, well, the world is nuts. So, and it keeps changing. So, like, I know you're going to shift things as it changes. And I know that your programming is going to shift. And I know that the athletes are going to shift. And I want it to be safe for everyone. So, like, traveling when it's not okay is not a part of this conversation. This conversation is just like, as someone who loves the sport of CrossFit and wants to watch the games, I'm still excited that there's a way, whether it be online, whether it be 5 weeks later, whether it be 30 people or 5 people, like, I'm still stoked to see it.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. It may sound, based on the previous conversation, that being a little bit critical here, but honestly, like, truth be told, I think this is the best case scenario in terms of being able to actually execute an on-site competition, being able to do so safely with minimizing risk, and still being able to provide something, at least as far as coverage and a competition, that, whether you disagree or agree that it should even be happening, people are going to tune in and watch, and it will provide a little bit of respite to a community that has quite honestly been reeling for quite some time at all levels, from the results of this pandemic. And it's funny because this may be an unpopular opinion, but I think that the one way it doesn't have an asterisk is if Matt and Tia go out and bail them out again. And that's the thing, because at this point in time, and this may be getting a little bit out there, but I would actually say that if Matt and Tia go out there and smash it yet again, then it almost kind of strengthens their claim across the past 4 and 5 years. Because now there is really nothing that you can actually throw at them that they
not
still
even a global pandemic.
It's like, okay, we've done the traditional CrossFit Games like legitimately for 3 years. Okay, now we've added cuts and thrown everything into a blender. Sure. Okay, well, now we've thrown in a global pandemic, forced you to qualify online, and then with only 4 people standing next to you, invited you out to this dusty ranch in Aromas and had you run away from mountain lions. Like, okay, there's literally nothing you can do here. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, there may be an asterisk to some extent, but if Matt and Tia win again, man, like, I'm hanging another banner up in the Raptors for them for sure.
Tommy, do you think that they will?
Yeah, I mean, I
you don't even have to think about that.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Wait. I just want to throw something out there real quick, because we're getting into the meat here. I like it. Number one, just want to get this one out of the way. The Open is not happening in October.
Oh, right. Of course.
Like,
we just did this. We just had a whole bottom line episode on how, like, we're pretty safe to say it's going to move. Yeah, it's moving.
That's going to come out a different day, but the Open is not happening in October. Let's just get that one out of the way. It may not happen exactly February, March, but it ain't happening in October, and Thanksgiving's in November, and Christmas is December, and then there's New Year's, and they ain't having it January 1. So let's just say February, March earliest time frame at this point.
I can't have the Open during my fat season.
No, you cannot. That would be completely inappropriate. So let's start there. Okay, let's get that one out of the way. Number 2, Roman Krenikov is going to be competing in his first CrossFit Games ever.
Very cool.
And I think that's super cool, and I'm super excited to see the Mad Russian throw down. And I talked to his manager, and he was like, I can't wait to tell Roman that he's going to be competing because he was already asleep, because of the time change in Russia. and so I'm like, yeah, this is super cool, and I hope he gets in the top 5 and gets to go. Because it would just be that much cooler to see him going out there.
Well, that'll be the big question, right? Is if he does qualify because of this online format, and then he can go, then let's
not throw too much more pessimism on the fire here, because there could be a scenario where there's a foreign athlete that is in the top 5 that can't go, but we'll cross that bridge when we get down there. But here, I just want to throw this one out here because I think this is kind of fun. Why doesn't Rich Froning do it?
Ooh. I just feel, he doesn't want to. I just feel like
but it's like an online, it's like doing an Open again.
I just don't. We've just asked so many times, and his answer's always been the same. His answer's always been like,
it's travel. He's already in shape. I'm just saying. I mean, just throwing it out there.
And he's out there slinging sticks at bison right now. That's what he's more focused on. He's hanging with his kids. He's making Froning Farms bison sticks. He's making Good Dudes coffee, and he's focused on the next year. I just, as much as it's fun to dream, No,
it's fun to dream. That's all I'm saying. I mean, he doesn't have to go anywhere. He's like,
I don't know. He has nothing to prove. He has not. I mean, like, this is not the competition. If he were ever to make a comeback in an individual sense, I don't see this being the time.
It would never be more convenient.
Convenience is not his. He's not competing. He's not fit because it's convenient.
Yeah, speaking from experience, once I retired from competitive dominoes, once I made that decision in my head, I there was no going back. Like, I laid my last tile. I'm not returning. I'm cruising into retirement.
Though every night I find myself asking, when will Tommy get back to competitive dominoes?
Hey. Maybe I won't.
For another episode on the bottom line, we will get down exactly to when that might be.
Absolutely. Guys, there is so much going on. We have seen so many changes. I'm sure that more changes are coming down the pipeline and more information will drop. And so I will have both of you back on here again to pick your brains about all of it. But for now, just waiting to see exactly what the next steps are. I'm dying to see what the actual dates of the in-person competition are, because I think that will also depend a lot on what the rest of the world, even outside of the CrossFit microcosm, is doing. But in the meantime, again, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts here, and we will see you guys next time on The Bottom Line.